Guys, hello, and welcome to another Training for Hiking live Q&A. As always, my name is Rowan, and today I'm answering your questions around training for hiking. The way these streams work is I do have a few questions that have been sent over to me prior to this, which I'm going to be working through. And also, anyone who may be joining me live, you're more than welcome to pop a question in the comments, and I'm happy to go through it. But essentially, what the questions we're going to be working through today is we're going to be talking through controlling heart rate on elevation, both during training and also on the trail. We're going to talk through a few simple balance exercises you can use, and also answering the question, how do you know if you're ready before an adventure? So, with that being said, let's start on controlling heart rate on elevation. And this was a question I recently got when I was talking about a specific hill training workout. And essentially, in this context, I was talking about a particular workout where I was recommending going up a hill and for part of the workout, trying to manage your intensity and manage your speed and essentially go at a speed where you constantly breathe in and out through the nose. And there's a little bit more to the workout itself, but that was a large part of it. And the question I got in this particular context was, what should you do if you are always going over your maximum heart rate constantly? So if you are climbing up the hill and everything you're doing, your heart rate's just spiking and you can't really manage this nose breathing or whatever it may be. So to give you a little bit of context around why this topic is important, when it comes down to improving your hiking performance, one of the best things you can do and the most beneficial things you can do to improve your time on the trail is manage your relative intensity on elevation. Because when it comes down to training, a lot of hikers out there, they will or training hiking. They'll hike and hike and hike. They'll hit a bit of incline, and all of a sudden their heart rate spikes. All of a sudden their breathing spikes. And people only have two speeds, either going at a pace where they get really out of breath and really uncomfortable and stopping. And a lot of hikers really don't have anything in between. So one of the most beneficial things you can do as a hiker is actually improving your ability to manage intensity, improving your ability to keep a little bit lower intensity, a bit of a slower speed. So you can go at a speed when you're climbing where you can just go steady. You can go step after step after step after step. It doesn't feel outrageously difficult. Your breathing never gets out of control. Your heart rate never gets out of control. And you can kind of get to that stage where you're constantly climbing comfortably as opposed to stop, start, stop, start, stop, start. Now, when we're looking at our training, we really do want to develop this aspect of fitness and also this skill in our training because it can be quite difficult to just apply on the trail. It can be quite difficult just to go on your hikes and be like, hey, I'm going to do this, but we want to develop it. And ultimately, with our training, if we can practice this, we can create certain adaptations in the body where we can actually make this a bit more comfortable, a bit more doable. And the more and more we train this aspect of fitness, we can actually go faster and faster and faster on these inclines while still going at that nice, slow and steady and controllable pace. And on top of that, as I said, this is a skill in itself. So if we can actually practice this skill and learn how to do this, it gets easier to manage on the trail. So we want to ensure that when we are training elevation, so when we're doing stair sessions or hill sessions or stair climb or incline treadmill or step sessions or whatever it may be, that we actually do practice this lower intensity. And we don't just do these sessions and spend whole sessions just huffed and puffed and out of breath and turning into a high intensity session. We want to make sure we're practicing the lower intensity. But the tricky thing is, sometimes for a lot of people, if they spent years and years and years, and that's the only speed they have, they hit elevation and they're just out of breath, or their heart rate spikes, it can be a little bit tricky. So, a couple of things. If you are trying to train this and you realize, look, you are just getting completely out of breath, or your heart rate is just spiking, first point of call is just reducing your speed down. So, essentially, whatever speed you're doing, which is causing that heart rate to jack up, pull it back a little bit. Ultimately, if you can get to a point where you can pull it back to a speed where you can climb and climb and climb without that heart rate spiking, that could be really beneficial. And a good target to aim for is going at a speed where you can constantly breathe in and out through the nose. That's like a good measure of intensity. Now, initially, this may feel tediously slow. Sometimes you may get to this point, you're like, oh my gosh, instead of walking, I'm like, one step, then two step, then three step. And that may be how slow you need to do to manage this. But if you can practice this, if you can develop it, it will get easier. The body will increase their fitness in this aspect, and you'll be able to go quicker and quicker and quicker, and eventually, over the weeks, get back to a normal hiking speed. But it is much less intense, much less tiring. That's ultimately what I'm looking at. So that's your first point of call. If you're trying to do these sessions and you're just like, hey, I'm struggling, pull back your speed. Even if it's super slow, one step forward for one step back for two steps forward. Alternatively, if you do this, and even if you slow it down to an absolute crawl and you're like, this is absolutely impossible. I just cannot do this. I cannot go to a pace where I can control my breathing. I cannot go to a pace where my heart rate's controlled, no matter how slow you go, then this is a sign that you probably need to spend some time developing this quality of fitness. This is probably a sign saying you spend so many years working at these higher intensities, the body's just gotten used to that. That's just a natural thing. And your actual aerobic fitness and the energy system your body uses to do this slower stuff isn't as developed as it could be. So you may have to take 2 or 3 steps back here to then move forward. So essentially how you would do this is you would sort of look at your training week and you would find some type of cardio which is a little bit easier to manage. So not the elevation stuff, but something's a bit easier to manage. Might be walking or cycling or the elliptical or flat pack walking or whatever it may be. And essentially, what you've set yourself the task to do is go on these sessions, do a constant duration, but essentially just stick to that low intensity. Stick to a pace where you can constantly breathe in and out through your nose, or stick to zone 2 or whatever it may be. And week by week by week, add duration. So add an extra 5 minutes each week or an extra 10 minutes each week. Now, the idea behind this is if we can spend time developing this quality of fitness, is what's called aerobic capacity. We'll create adaptations in the body which will allow us to do harder and harder things while still maintaining this low intensity, which is what we want for the elevation. Now, this may be really, really tedious. And if you've got a history and like you've spent your entire life just going at these quicker speeds, this can be really, 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 really frustrating. You may have to go super slow to manage your intensity. It may have to be a really, really crawl. And it can be very, very, very slow to develop. This active aspect of fitness is slow. It's not quick. You need to be patient. And it can take 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 weeks for it to make a significant difference. A lot of people don't have that patience. But if you're looking at a longer term thing and you're aware that, look, every time I hit elevation, I get out of breath or my heart rate spikes. And even if I go super, 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 super slow, I just cannot manage it. This could be a very worthwhile investment. So if you are approaching your elevation, yeah, that's advice for here. If it is really, really hard and it just ramps up, then control your intensity, slow it down a little bit. Even if you're tediously slow, perfectly fine. If that's absolutely impossible for you, then you may need to put a bit more attention into lower, steadier cardio, slowly build up that quality of fitness, and then slowly move forward. So hopefully that gives a bit of advice and give a bit of help there. A lot of people fall into this situation, so hopefully it helps a few people. Next question I got sent through was about balance exercises. So obviously balance relatively important for a lot of hikers. And the question was, I want to improve my balance, but I'm just bored of the exercises I'm doing. And I think in this context, after chat with them, they were just doing a lot of single-legged balance stuff, which is like the starting point of a lot of balance, literally just standing on one leg. And they just asked, do you have any good ideas? So there's a million and one different exercises you can do out there to help with your balance. And there's so many different things. But I'm going to share with you 4 of my favorite options. So number one is a really, really, really simple thing. And this is a nice progression from the standard single leg balance, where you're literally just standing on one leg and just balancing there. The round the world is a great option where basically all you need is like a weight of some type. You can use a water bottle or whatever it may be. And essentially all you're doing is standing on one leg and essentially you are just slowly rotating that weight around your hips. You go in one direction for like 5 or 6 reps and then the other direction for 5 or 6 reps. This in itself is a really, really nice progression from a standard balance because it just changes the balance requirements a little bit. It adds a little bit extra challenge. You'll notice you kind of have to like balance it out a little bit. It's a really, really simple progression. In this particular version, I'm doing it standing on a mat. I would typically say, the first point of call, if you're doing this, practice it just on the floor because that's hard enough. And then you can introduce like a folded up mat. You can introduce like a stability disc. You could do it on a Bosu ball or whatever it may be, anything like that. But this is a really, really, really simple option here. And I'll share that link in chat if anyone wants to check it out. The second one that I quite like is what's called a 3-cone balance. So this is a really, really simple option again. What we're going to do is just load up 3 cones in front of us or 3 water bottles or whatever it may be. You're going to stand on one leg and you're basically just going to come down touch each of those with one hand, and then touch each of those with the other hand. So we're sort of changing the different angles. Again, this is a nice progression for balance because what it does is it changes our posture and gets us into these different positions where we kind of have to balance as we're going through. It's just a nice progression. And also it ends up being like doing a little bit of work on the hamstrings and the glutes, which can be quite nice as well. Now, again, I would typically recommend starting this just from the floor because it can be hard enough initially. And then as you progress it, you can introduce the mat or a stability disc or a Bosu ball. The other way where you can make this a little bit more difficult is you can use sort of like lower cones, or if you're using water bottles, use like mugs, like a coffee mug. And then from a coffee mug, you can go down and just touching the floor, and you can just increase that range of motion a little bit. Very, very simple, but can be quite nice. And I'm going to share that in chat as well if you want to check that out. The next one, now, admittedly, fair warning, this next video is awful. I recorded this, I think it was back in COVID, and I've never really recorded anything again, and it's an absolutely terrible quality, but it'll give you the idea. The next one is called the Star Balanced Exercise. So the idea behind this exercise, and you may not be able to see it super well in this video. Um, let's see if I can move my face a little bit. Basically, what we're doing is we are going to stand on one leg and we're going to put a series of things around us. And I think it's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, like 8 different things kind of circled around us in a star. 8 or whatever it may be. In this situation, I use my flip flops, my thongs. You could literally use anything or whatever it may be. And essentially, what we're going to do is we're going to stand on one leg, and what we're going to do is we're going to reach to each of these different points of the star as we go through. And the idea behind this is again, it's just changing the different angles that we kind of need to balance, change in the different places where we need to kind of keep everything stable. And it can be a really, really, really good challenge. YouTube is not, the stream is still working because I just got something coming up. But either way, yeah, so this can be a great option. You'll probably notice if you're doing this, some of the points will be easy for you, some of the points will be a little bit more difficult for you, but it can work out really well. For this itself, it can be hard enough just as is. The way to make it a little bit more difficult is you can move those points a little bit further out. So you actually have to stretch out a little bit more, and it can make a bit more a challenge. On top of that, if you really want to take this a step further, you can introduce like a folded up mat underneath you or a stability disc. That is quite difficult and very, very, very hard. It could be an option for you. And then finally, the last, and I'll share that video, even though it is a horrible video, but I'll share it either way. And the final exercise I'll kind of share here is a forward lunge with a front lunge. Now, this is a really, really nice introduction where we're basically looking at a traditional strength exercise where we can load up and still get a good strengthening effect, but it has a very specific balance requirement. So it can be a nice way to progress things. Now, the idea behind this is essentially we are doing a forward lunge. So we're stepping forward, going to a lunging position, coming down. Now, what we're doing here is we've got a pack and we've got it on a front rack position. So we've got our elbows nice and high. It's kind of sitting here. Now, the reason why this is a balance exercise or can be useful for balance for hikers is essentially when you've got the pack in that position, you can't actually see where your feet are going. And when I was doing this actual video, it's really, really hard to judge where the foot's going. So we essentially have to use quite a bit of balance and stability just to make sure we're going the right position and essentially doing that in a way which we're not using eyes to balance ourselves out. In the hiking context, this could be a really specific thing because quite often we'll be stepping, stepping, stepping. We're not really looking where we're going, and this can be quite useful. So I quite like this because it does take a traditional strength exercise. You can still load this up. It's still going to be challenging with a bit of weight, but it just adds a tiny bit of specific balance in the way that it won't take away from the strength exercise, but become quite useful. So that's another one you can play around with. So yeah, when we're looking at balance exercises, they're kind of four of my favorites. Like there's obviously a million and one different ways you can go about this, but I quite like that and it can work out pretty well. So bear with me and I'm just seeing what's going on with my stream. Yeah, no idea what's going on. But anyway, hopefully everything is kind of coming through okay. And then basically the final question I wanted to cover today is the question of how to know if you're ready. And this is a question I got the other day, and basically someone was asking me like, look, I have a 7,000 meter expedition coming up in 2 weeks. I've been doing a bit of treadmill walking each day for the last couple of months. Am I good to go? And they were basically asking, is there a test I can do in the gym to know if I'm going to be ready? So, bit of a tricky situation, but it is sort of something I often get asked, and yeah, definitely worthwhile exploring. Realistically, when it comes down to these adventures, obviously we always do want to be confident that we are ready to head off on an adventure because there's so many nerves, there's so many unknowns. Like a lot of people get really stressed about this type of stuff, so we want to be confident that we are ready. However, like, it can be a little bit tricky because there is no test we can do which can 100% guarantee that we're going to be ready because there's so many unknowns in the world of hiking and mountaineering. There's different terrain, there's altitude, there's weather, there's, multiple days or whatever it may be. There's so many unknowns. And on top of this, like as much as a lot of people often talk about fitness tests to kind of judge, most fitness tests out there in the world of fitness is just not super relevant for hikers or mountaineers. You'll often hear people talk about VO2 max testing, and you'll go on to a specific test and get a judgment on your aerobic fitness, but it's not super relevant for mountaineers or hikers. Maybe a step test, maybe a beat test, all of this stuff that often gets used in gyms. Yeah, it can get like an idea of your fitness, but it's not super relevant. Ultimately, if you are wanting to know your readiness for an adventure, you need to get specific. You need to look at what you're doing on that adventure and ultimately get as close to that as possible. Ultimately, what I use to judge my readiness for my hikers and my mountaineers, and the main metric I use, is trying to make sure we are confident we can do the equivalent of your longest day on the mountain or on your hike with your heaviest pack weight. So what I mean by that, if you're in a situation and you're going on an adventure, and out of all the days you're doing, your longest day was going to be 8 hours. Out of all the days you're doing, your heaviest pack weight is going to be 15 kilos. The measure of readiness that I look at is you should be able to do, confidently you can do an 8 hour day with a 15 kilo pack as a day hike. That's typically what I look at. Or alternatively, if you're in the situation where your longest day was going to be 6 hours and your heaviest pack was going to be 7 kilos, you would kind of use that metric. That's typically what I use, in the sense that I'll get people to do that as a day hike. If they do it, happy days. Now, admittedly, this obviously isn't perfect because it doesn't account for multiple days of hiking or mountaineering because it's just a day hike. It doesn't account for terrain because you may not be in the mountains, you may not have mud, you may not have whatever it may be. It doesn't account for weather, hot, cold, doesn't account for altitude, any of that. It's definitely not perfect. But, I've used this over years and it tends to be a pretty good judge. If you can do this, be confident with this, be happy with this, it's pretty good thing saying, you know what, 2 thumbs up, you're ready to roll. Now, with this as well, like sometimes, this may not be realistic to actually do because, we sort of say the longest down the mountain. Well, what if you're doing like Kilimanjaro and you're doing the summit night? It's like your trip's got like a 14-hour summit night. Are you really going to do that in your training? Probably not. Or if you look at the mountaineering side of things, you might be looking at like a 20-hour summit push. Are you going to do a 20-hour session in your training? Probably not. Um, so, again, it's not perfect. So in those situations, it would kind of look at, okay, what is realistically the longest time I can spend in my training? Can I do 8 hours? Can I do 9 hours? Can I do 10 hours? Is that going to be crazy for me or whatever it may be? And just use that as your longest day. And then if you can't quite get as close to what you need to do, maybe just overcompensate a bit on pack weight. So in this particular situation, let's sort of say your longest day was going to be 12 hours, but you're like, I can only really do an 8 hour, 8 hour hike. Well, then maybe you might just add an extra couple of extra kilos in your pack compared to, again, it's not perfect. It's not going to line up exactly, but kind of ends up being, relatively close. So that's kind of what I look at. Now, in regards to the gym, because the original question was like, is there a test I can do this in the gym? You know, like if you want to do this in gym, hypothetically, you could do this on the treadmill. Um, I would sort of say try to do this outdoors if you can, but I understand some people don't have access to trails, can't travel, whatever it may be, where there may be an issue. Hypothetically, you could do this in the gym, but it does run into the issues of number one, it's boring as anything, doing 8 hours on the treadmill. My gosh. Number two, terrain matching, just doing a flat manicured surface, not quite the same, and also just can be uncomfortable. Uncomfortable purely for the fact just on that surface of the treadmill, if you're doing hours and hours and hours and the way the belt moves, it may not be super nice. So hypothetically, you could do it. um, I would really lean to at least, doing it outdoors, like in any way possible that you could do it. The final sort of note I would sort of say on this is, again, going back to the original question, this was like 2 weeks before they go, just asking, is there a test? I would definitely not throw this in the last couple of weeks if you haven't been doing something similar in your training. Because in this situation, they're doing like 3 kilometers on the treadmill. That might be what, like 2 hours max or something like that. I wouldn't recommend jumping up to like an 8 hour treadmill session because that's just a recipe for getting in pain before you head away. Should be realistically part of your long term hiking plan in the sense that one of the best things you could do, one of the main things you want to do with your training is that when you start training, leading up to when you actually head off, coming up with a plan where you can slowly but surely build up to this and set yourself the target that you have this ultimate end point 2 or 3 weeks before you head off and then slowly build up to it. That's kind of what like training hikes or longer cardio is all about. So, but yeah, but if you were looking at like, getting a bit of a measure of readiness, that's kind of what we want to look at. There are other things you can talk about like step tests or this and that and this, but in all honesty, they're not super relevant. It can be interesting to track progress over time, but if you really want to know readiness, that's kind of what we're looking at. Which I know it's not a perfect answer, but hopefully it gives a few ideas. So, with that being said, that's kind of covered all the questions I had sent through prior to me today. And it doesn't look like anything's come through live at this stage. So, I might wrap things up there and go get myself a little bit of lunch. So, with that being said, I will sort of say if anyone does have any questions they want me to cover in future streams, feel free to post up, flick me an email, post up in the group, post up on YouTube, or put a comment on the YouTube or whatever it may be. I'm happy to pop them on the list for next time. But aside from that, anyone watching in the future, I hope you've enjoyed this. Hope you got a little bit out of it and we'll talk to you all very, very